guys. First of all, my name is Aminata Mbaye, and I'm the founder and CEO of PYNK Wellness. Last year, I lived in Senegal for 6 months, and I thought I was going to discover some riveting issue. And the biggest problem I had was having access to quality feminine wellness products. And that seems so regular, but women in Africa and women in Senegal specifically are really struggling with getting quality pads, getting quality tampons, getting quality vitamins and things like that. And I was struggling with that while I was living there as well. It just wasn't sitting right with me. Because why should we be able to walk to CVS and we have thousands of pad options, and then back home there's two, and they're not even that great. Filled with chemicals, dyes, chlorine is just not good for women in general. So upon coming back, I did a plethora of research. Feels like my head is going to explode at this point, and that's how PYNK Wellness came to be. So I want to thank all of you ladies, because when you travel all the way down here to Brooklyn to support PYNK Wellness, you're not just supporting us, but you're supporting women in Senegal who deserve quality products. So cheers to you ladies, and cheers to PYNK Wellness. Cheers! Woo!
All right. Welcome to Pan-African Perspectives, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa. We talk about the news of the day, my experience on the continent, and from time to time, we interview people who are building businesses back home. Today, we have a special guest, Aminata Mbaye, who's going to tell us the story of her decision to start this company, PYNK Wellness, and why she started it, what the impetus for it was, and what the experience has been like so far. She's going to talk about the pre-launch and the launch and so much more. But before we get into the interview, let me do a quick introduction for myself. So I'm Joe Hatagwa. I founded Authentic African Media to help people visit, move, and invest on the continent of Africa. We do live streams weekly where we talk about the issues of the day across the continent. We also talk to people who have moved to the continent, built businesses there, and folks who are going back and forth. And then, of course, I also tell my story of building a house and buying land on the continent. And of course, as you all know, I lived in Ghana and Sierra Leone for just about 4 years altogether. So now we are focused on telling people stories who are making the transition to building a business on the continent. So without further ado, I will bring on Aminata. So here we are. Aminata, thanks for joining.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I would love for you to start by kind of giving everybody a little bit of background on who you are before we kind of talk about PYNK. Your background, your connection to Senegal, so people understand, who you are, so they can, to learn a little bit more about you before we talk about the business.
Absolutely. First of all, I think Joe already gave me a sterling introduction, so thank you, Joe. My name is Aminata Mbaye. I'm first generation Senegalese. My parents migrated to New York City basically right before I was born, and I grew up in New York for the most part. But my parents did a very good job of making sure that my cultural presence was still there in our household. I speak Wolof. It's not amazing. I do have an American accent, but people can understand me for the most part. And we watch Senegalese shows and ate Senegalese cuisine 100% of the time growing up in my house. So I was very much still connected to my culture. So that's a little bit about me. I grew up in Harlem, New York, which also has a very big Senegalese community. So that also helped. Joe already knows. He was just talking about Little Senegal, which is 116th Street. And I've always felt very connected to my cultural identity, at least up until I got into adulthood, and then I was more concerned about my career. But we'll get into that later.
Absolutely. And yes, my aunt lives on 116th Street right now. So I'm in Little Senegal every time I go to see her. So, I do want to ask you a little bit about how this business came to be, right? I mean, because, there are a lot of things that you could be doing with your time, your energy, and your effort. And so, and in that video, you kind of described it, but maybe you can bring a wider lens to it. So what led, I know you went to Senegal, was it in December of 2024? Is that when you went?
That's when I went for good. That's when I went for 6 months.
Went for 6 months. Okay. Can you tell us when you what preempted the idea of Pink Wellness, and what did you experience that made you think
Yeah.
about starting this business?
So in December 2024, I decided for good. It ended up being like 6 months there, and I ended up going back to New York. But I went to Senegal, and I was able to see Senegal from a different lens. Usually, I would go to Senegal for a vacation, right? So I'd go there and I'd have my fun and I'd go home. But this time, I got to really experience living in Senegal every single day and seeing people also go through their everyday lives. And one of the things I noticed firsthand, because I also experienced this, and also other women that were around me, my friends, my family, was that there just wasn't enough access to quality products. There are quality products. I don't want to sit here and say there's nothing. There are quality products, but they're either extremely expensive or out of budget for the average person. And when I say quality, I mean like maybe it's organic cotton and still has perfume, or maybe it's, very ultra thin and breathable but still has chlorine, but it just wasn't at the highest standard. And that's just specifically for pads, which is our first product. But in general, if I needed something wellness based, a lot of people in Senegal are still using herbal wellness, which is absolutely amazing, right? But sometimes you want the more modern version, right? And that's what I noticed. I saw a woman hiding their irritation with how much they really didn't have access to these products, and hiding their issues that they were having within their intimate health because they felt ashamed, and society already made them feel like it's shameful to have to go through these certain things, right? So this kind of opened my eyes, because I think America maybe 10 years ago, like at least started going through this revolution of, getting cleaner feminine products out there. But I really noticed that Senegal hadn't caught up. So that's kind of how Pink came to be.
Now, you mentioned you moved for 6 months. I did the same thing. I moved. It lasted 4 years. What was the reason that you wanted to move back to Senegal, or move to Senegal, I should say, full time? Yeah, what brought you to that decision, and what were you doing in your career before you moved, or you planned to move?
Yeah. So I moved to Senegal because in December of 23, actually, I went back to Senegal for the first time in I think 7 years, right?
Okay.
So it was a long time, because during that time I was in college and I kind of was building my career, which I'll get into later. But I went to Senegal for the first time in 7 years. And that trip, if I could describe it in a single word, it would just be riveting,
Mm.
because Senegal had modernized so much. Like it was crazy to me. The Senegal that I saw when I came when I was 15 was not the same Senegal that I saw when I came in December of 2023. So I was in awe of that. But then I also realized that within the modernization, a lot of people, a lot of average Senegalese people were still struggling within their daily lives and didn't have any resources to help them. And I went through experiences that made me realize that it just made me want to get back into my African roots. And not saying I'm not, but made me want to get back to Africa and start thinking with Africa at the front of my mind. Ever since I was 5 years old, I would always tell my family, when I grow up, I'm going to build a hospital in Senegal, because I
Mm.
would see my family members get sick and then they'd say, I don't want to go to the hospital. They'd only make it worse. So to me, the only viable solution in my 5-year-old brain is, okay, so I have to bring a good hospital, right? And somewhere along the way, I lost that dream, right? And I just kind of wanted to get back to that. Like I was too stuck in the American dream, and that trip really made me kind of come back to reality and realize that my people really needed help, and not because I'm a savior, and not because they're weak or anything, or not because they need pity, but because the reality is the government and the organization within Senegal is not the same as the government in America. There's no EBT, Joe, as you know. There's no New York's housing authority. Like if you struggle, you struggle, and you struggle on your own. So that entire reality kind of inspired me to come back home and see what I can do to help. Before moving to Senegal, though, I was the chief of staff of the America's technology sector for a wealth management firm called UBS, and that's like a global, one of the biggest global wealth management firms. And at that time, I was working hybrid, so I kind of had to figure out how I was going to make that move work with my job, and yeah, that all led to me going to Senegal for 6 months.
Got it. And what you're talking about in social safety nets, I think, are really important, because I think, obviously Europe, Canada, United States have different versions of it. And many of us take it for granted, right? When you lose a job, you have unemployment. If you don't have enough of an income to buy food. You have EBT or food stamps for those who aren't familiar with that. And those social safety nets help people. They're supposed to bridge the gap between financial circumstances. Sometimes people stay on them for much longer, entire lifetimes, etc. But at least they're available to you here in the States. And just like what you said, in where the countries that we come from, there are no social safety nets. So to that point, if you lose a job, that's it. And I think it's important that people think about that and realize that, because that's really important. Now, so you went for 6 months. What brought you back after 6 months?
Within those 6 months, that's kind of when I got the inspiration to build a business in Senegal.
Yeah.
Because I actually, during that time, started being more active on social media. Before that, I wasn't really active on TikTok specifically, or social media in general. I wasn't posting. I was more of a viewer, right? And within that 6 months, I started posting my experience of being an American-raised Senegalese girl randomly moving to Senegal. And then that situation kind of went viral. And then I started crowdfunding and raising money for these orphaned, in a way, boys in Senegal called talibes. And through social media, and within that time, I raised $10,000 in about like 2 months. And that kind of showed me that I had much more of an impact that I thought I had, right? And it kind of inspired me. And I said, if I wanted to really make an impact, I needed to create a business and find a way to make money and in a way that I could actually donate back to the community, in a way that I'm in the driver's seat and can say, hey, I want to create more jobs for this marginalized group. Hey, I want to be able to build a foundation and donate this percentage of our profits to this marginalized group. I want to be able to do these things. And that made me realize that I really should build a business, because I wanted to be an entrepreneur anyway. That was before anything, and build a business back home instead of my original thought, which was in America. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to hear that you employ one person, you feed 5 people. Like on the continent of Africa, that's how it works, right? So it's really important for us to create the jobs that people are waiting for the governments to build, right?
Exactly.
I'm not gonna ask you any specific questions. I will say that the president of Senegal just recently became the chairman of ECOWAS. That was news over the weekend. The president of Sierra Leone, who was the chairman of ECOWAS for the last year, just handed over the chairman of ECOWAS to your current president in Senegal. I'll skip the politics because I know I've talked to many Senegalese about it. I won't jump into that with you here because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you about that, so I won't do that. This is just recent news, so I wanted to mention that to folks. So your founder's message says silence should not be inherited. Can you explain like where this comes from and how did you decide that this is something you should focus on as a business versus just knowing that it shouldn't be a thing?
Absolutely. I think that in Senegal specifically, right? Senegal is a secular country, and majority of people are Muslim, right? I'm Muslim, thank God. I'm Muslim. So, and that's a great thing. But I feel like with that comes a sense of conservatism, right? And Senegal is still a very conservative country. And within that conservatism, even when people migrate overseas, it's like there's this silence that's inherited in a lot of sensitive topics. And one of them is intimate and sexual health. Like we kind of grow up saying it's like don't ask, don't tell. Like you have an experience within your intimate health, you got to figure it out. There's really nobody's asked because nobody is comfortable enough to actually talk about it. And within that silence, ignorance is also inherited because people just assume that they're doing the right things when they're actually doing the worst things. Like you should not have fragrance in your intimate areas, but they think, oh, I should smell good for my husband because my mom said I should smell good for my husband. And that kind of just goes on generation and generation. And women just continue to keep their mouth shut, specifically when it comes to intimate health. Like, there are a lot of other subjects that line can relate to. But when it comes to intimate health, women are told to just be quiet and kind of figure it out. And that's why I put that line there, because I want to create a space, even in a conservative society, even in a conservative country that's extremely religious, where women can feel safe to come and say, hey, I'm confused about this. And if I'm confused about this, I don't feel comfortable asking somebody in my family. I know that there's a company who educates on the subject, who actually says the medical terms out loud instead of sugarcoating them. When it comes to pink, we say the medical terms. We will not call it a kitty cat, right? We're not going to give it a nickname. We're going to say exactly what it's called, and we're not going to sugarcoat it. And I want to create a space where even if you're in your household, that silence is still inherited. You can come to Pink and ask us, because we'll let you know what it actually is, and you don't have to, go on in ignorance.
I think it's really important, and you made a good point that I think a lot of times religion can sometimes be culture, and then culture can be conservative. And I what I will say is that is not unique to Senegal.
Exactly.
It's not even unique to Islam, right? Because there are many
Exactly.
conservative Christians as well and operate in the same way.
Hmm.
And it is true. I think that I think that this topic is taboo many times,
Very much.
especially West Africa. I can't speak about all of the continent, but
Yeah.
from my conversations with folks, this is something that I think is absolutely needed. So you're absolutely filling a space, and I'm interested to see as you grow the impact that you make. Now, I did want to ask you about the pre-launch, right? So, you
Hmm.
and I got in contact maybe a few weeks ago. I reached out to you, and you were mentioning that the pre-launch was coming. I want you to take me to the date of the pre-launch, what you did to kind of get the word out there, and then we'll talk about the formal launch in a moment. But I'd love to hear about this pre-launch and how it went.
Absolutely. I think our pre-launch was what, last week Thursday. I'm not sure exactly what date that was. Was that the ninth? Yeah, I believe it was the ninth.
Days ago
And
was so that'd be
yeah,
Sun. Okay, we got it.
yeah. So our pre-launch, basically, the what we did to get word out there is something that's pretty unconventional. Not for West Africa, not for America. I will say that. So we basically launched our Pink Rapids. There is a mega rapid and a mini rapid. The car rapid is something that's very significant and very important to the cultural identity of Senegal. We are known for these colorful buses with these symbols and all types of things painted on them. And it's a really big part of Senegalese tradition and heritage. So when I was thinking of like, how can I make some noise? Just for your guys' reference, car rapids are usually like yellow, green, red, blue, like primary colors. I'm thinking, how can I make some noise in the community? How can I get the community to like see us? And one of the first things I thought of was karapit. Like I said, Senegal is a pretty traditional country, so I know that people would be shocked by this pink rapid because it hasn't really been done before. So the pink rapid pretty much took social media by storm and was so viral that people were posting it on their own pages, right? And I couldn't ask for no more than that. But I didn't even expect it to make that much of a splash. People were posting it on their own pages. It was all over Snap. People were calling me like, "I just saw your car happen on this street." People were tagging us, and we made it like a citywide scavenger hunt. If you find it up, we'll give you guys a pink gift bag filled with our favorite wellness items. So everybody was just tagging us and sending us pictures, and it was a very very cool experience because it felt like something that I took from my brain and just like it became a reality, and then everybody loved it. I will say though, on that note, right? People were so shook. Speaking of taboo, a lot of people, a good chunk, not a lot, not the majority, not nowhere near the majority, not even 1%, but a handful of people were commenting under our Instagram, like, hey, why did you write pads on this karapit? What if a woman is embarrassed? And then that really shows how taboo of a subject, intimate and sexual health and menstrual health for women is still in the society. If people are still like, you have pads on this bus, that's not okay. And it's just pads, right? So I will say that I think that's important to know. But majority of people were like, this is so cool. I love this. I want to take a picture with it, right? So I just want to say that.
Nice. I mean, that is an interesting way to launch the business because, as you said, you had what they call earned media, right? Meaning that you didn't have to pay any influencers or do anything. People were proactively sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you pronounce it? How do you guys pronounce it?
Karapit.
Carape. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, In Ghana, it's a trotro. I can't remember what we call it in Sierra Leone. Every country has their own version. Pora pora, I think in Sierra Leone. We all have our own name for our little mini buses, but we all have them in our countries as these are our forms of public transportation, right?
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, I think that was a really smart move, and obviously it captured a lot of people's attention. Now you're building your momentum towards the actual launch. So can we talk about when the launch is? I think you told me July 25th, so that's in about 5 days. And you are obviously in Senegal right now. I guess we should mention that. But talk to us about the launch. What is the plan for the launch itself?
So we basically started this new social series, and we launched it in New York actually on June 12th, and it's called Club PYNK. And Club PYNK is basically a space where women can come and feel seen, welcomed, and try new things when it comes to wellness. And in New York, we did a Pilates class, and in Senegal, we're doing the same, but it's much larger, obviously, because it's our launch event. So what we're doing is we're welcoming the community of women to come and take a Pilates class, get their henna done, get flowers, and they get to sit down and have a conversation with basically a midwife, which in Senegal is pretty much like an OBGYN assistant. And they also get to meet the current Miss World Senegal for 2026, Fatima Diop, and she's going to talk about women's mental health in Africa. And we're basically making a space where women can come and feel seen and feel heard and can learn more about PYNK, but also discover more about themselves, right? And that's why we try to plug in all those experiences. So if anyone watching happens to be in the car, come through. You can find it on our Instagram, but also it's at the Blessed Senghor Cultural Center.
Awesome. And so obviously feminine care is is obviously a sensitive topic, sometimes taboo, something that I know very little about. So how do you anticipate you'll be able to bring people in to be able to feel confident and comfortable to come talk to you about it? Because as you said, it's a very conservative country when it comes to these kinds of things. I mean, do you think like the van will help people feel like, okay, there's somewhere I can go? Like what is your plan to kind of communicate that this is a safe space that you can come talk about these questions that you might have?
Absolutely. So this might be a good time to mention that we actually have an in-house midwife. She's an amazing woman. She's been a midwife for 19 years. And as I explained, midwives in Senegal are basically the equivalent of being a nurse to an OBGYN. So she does all types of work when it comes to feminine care and feminine health in general. And there's absolutely no way I would be more knowledgeable than her when it comes to this area. I have studied it a lot, but she knows way more than me. And that's something that I knew when I was starting PYNK, that I'd have to find people who do this for life, right? That's very important. So we brought her in so that when we create our products, for one, so she can check us, right? She can say, actually, I don't like this ingredient, right? That's very important. Two, so when we have these events, women can feel comfortable talking to a professional, because that's very important. I am not a professional doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a midwife. I am not certified in this field. And that's exactly why we brought her in, because I don't want women to feel like they have to talk to me, the owner of PYNK. I want people to feel like they can talk to a professional who does this every day in their everyday life. Sure, you can ask me a question if you're comfortable, but I think people are generally more comfortable speaking to professionals, right? So that was very important to me.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And then when it comes to logistics and distribution, what products? So I heard about some services, right? So communication with a midwife that has a wealth of knowledge, Pilates classes as well. I know one of the challenges you saw were a lower variety of products. Is there a plan to introduce more products to the market, whether that's through a branded version or other external products? What's the plan in terms of the distribution of the additional products that you that were missing that you discovered?
Absolutely. So PYNK Wellness is called PYNK Wellness for a reason. We want to be a full wellness house. We started with menstrual care because we feel like it's a huge gap and there is a huge lack of products and attention to women's menstrual health in the community. Right. So that's why we started with that, because it's very important that women understand that having good menstrual care is not a luxury. having good menstrual care is not a luxury because women do have to face this every single month, and they deserve products that take care of them and take care of their entire body, right? So that's why we started with menstrual care. But Pink Wellness plans to expand and do further wellness activities and to further wellness services and further wellness products in the future. And that's why we're called Pink Wellness and not like Pink Menstrual or Pink Feminine Care specifically, right? So in the future, we hope that we can offer a variety of wellness means for women in Senegal and hopefully all over Africa.
Awesome. I think this is really great work. I have a friend of mine who is in the same industry, and she works for a nonprofit that imports products into the country, and she has conversations with girls' schools all around the country or girls in schools all around the country. And so, yeah, I think when you're ready to come to Sierra Leone, we have a plug for you that can really get you out in front of people immediately, because this is what she does, and it's obviously necessary and needed. It's called the Mama Pekin Foundation, mother daughter, in our own Pidgin English Creole. That's how it's described. Okay, so now you're still based technically in the U.S., but you do go back and forth. Is your plan to move back to Senegal again full time at some point?
I'd like to eventually. If it's up to me, for sure, I'd like to eventually. I don't plan on living in America for a long time. I personally do want to live in Senegal when I can.
Ditto. Sierra Leone or Ghana for me probably, but yes, I still haven't been to Senegal as of yet. Everybody who I know has been loves it, so it's on my list. I have to get to Senegal at some point in time in the near future. So what advice would you give to women in the diaspora who want to build something back home but don't know where to start?
I think the advice I would give is if you're going on vacation back home, I would just look a little deeper. Then I get to see my family and I get to eat, the best and freshest food, and I get to be by like I get to be in nature or whatever. It is a true experience in your country because Africa is huge. Every country is different, right?
Sure.
I want you to go on that trip and just look at if you lived there full time, what would be a huge disturbance to you? Like what would be something that's like really riveting to you? Like you would say, hey, this is groundbreaking. Like if I had something to fix this problem of mine, it would really make a change in my life. If I could have this one thing, I would move here full time. But because this one thing is bothering me so much, I cannot live here. I would really urge you to think about that because usually there's a gap that you can fill just from that one question.
100%. Any challenges starting? I know this is so, one of the things we talk about a lot, I always ask people that question while you think about it, while you formulate your answer, and I'm sure there are a few. We talk a lot about doing business abroad. And I listened this weekend to a podcast where somebody who was interviewed, and they asked him about the difference between doing business in the United States and doing business in Africa. And he's like, Africa is not behind. We just have a separate set of problems. Sometimes we need additional water supply. Sometimes we need backups, electricity, fuel costs, etc., vehicle maintenance. So for you, right, you launched with a physical vehicle. I'm interested to even understand how you acquired this vehicle, wrapped it, and all of that with branding and all of that. I'm interested in how all happened. But what are some of the challenges you ran into, right? Just doing this pre-launch and building as you've been there in country.
Yeah, just to clarify, honestly, that's not. It's PYNK is renting that vehicle technically, right? We don't own that vehicle, right? So I think just connecting with the everyday person, because you'd be surprised who would let you paint their bus pink. Like that's the easiest way for me to say it, right? So it's not our vehicle, but we were able to connect with somebody with two grown men who were like, yeah, paint my bus pink, right? So the opportunity is there, right? For all the other people who have the same bus in their country. You never know, right? But when it comes to Africa, I think the biggest challenge, obviously, is lack of infrastructure. Right? There's a level of infrastructure that just doesn't exist in for specifically Senegal. I can't speak to every country. There's a lot of African countries, right? But for specifically Senegal, Senegal is one of like one country that's modernizing and on the up and up for sure. They're doing a great job, but there's still this lack of infrastructure that will affect you when you're building your business. It's not as easy as it would be in America, where you can log into LegalZoom and you get an LLC. Here is documentation and it's paper, and you got to be in person, or you got to have that like that procuration, which we say is kind of like a power of attorney in English, right? You have to have somebody that's willing to represent you in your business, because these things are still done in agencies. These things are still done in offices. There's still people who work at a desk typing that up, right? It's not as easy as you go in and there's a computer system that does these things for you. So there's definitely an infrastructure thing, and that's just in terms of paperwork. But there's an infrastructure thing when it comes to money. There's an infrastructure things when it comes to delivery. There's an infrastructure thing when it comes to the government. Like there's all types of infrastructure issues, right? So that's just something that you'll have to get used to when you're building your business, at least in Senegal. And I'm sure people can relate otherwise, but I don't like to generalize. So at least in Senegal, obviously there's this big stereotype that there's like a lack of trust when it comes to building your business in Africa. And I say stereotype because for me, I think it's unfair to generalize that far and say millions of people are untrustworthy, right? It's just like a difference in culture, I believe, because I think it's a bit unfair to think that somebody's going to manage something for you and you're just going to be super hands off and then imagine it to be perfect, right? A lot of the times, if you care about something, you have to chase that. You are responsible for whatever you create, whether it's a business or what buying land or building a house, whatever it is, you are responsible for that. So you have to trust yourself as much as you trust whoever you leave in charge of that, basically. And then lastly, I would just say kind of like that still level of traditionalism that exists in some of our countries. That's a challenge, right? And Senegal, like I said, Senegal is refreshingly modern. I like to say that. Like we're still a very modern country, and you're still seeing women in positions of power, like the government. Women are building businesses. Women are doing their thing, but you're not seeing women taxi drivers still, right? Unlike in America, where there are Uber drivers that are women, right? So we're not that far into modernization, but there are still these roles. So if you're a woman specifically and you're building in a traditional country, then that might be a challenge for you too. So I think those were a few issues.
Understood. Yeah, and some good advice there as well. Anything I missed? Anything I didn't ask you that you'd want people to know about PYNK and maybe even what it's been like for you in this journey so far?
Yeah, I just definitely want to mention, because I know that you have an audience that's super, super large. Congratulations. But also it's a diaspora audience. Like it's people all over the diaspora, people in Africa, people in America, and people all over the place, right? So I kind of want to mention, just follow PYNK in our journey, because there might be ways that you can contribute to our mission of making mental care more accessible for people in Africa. In September, we plan on launching something called the Pink Pantry, where people who are in the diaspora, who have better means and more means than people who are currently living in Africa, the average person, can purchase menstrual items to donate to people who are actually in need. And we'll facilitate that process. So if you're interested in something like that and want to give back to your community without actually, being on the ground or, going to do it yourself, definitely follow us, because that will be coming very soon.
And remind us again where they can follow you, on what platforms, and what is the tag, the label?
Absolutely. So it's at PYNK, that's PYNK, because PYNK stands for Protect Your Natural Kingdom, .SN. So that's at PYNK .SN with a Y.
Got it. PYNK.SN, and SN is for Senegal, for those who aren't aware. It's like the .com, right? But it's .sn. Got it. And then if people want to follow your personal journey, do you want to plug your own personal IG?
Absolutely. So that's at Ami, AMI. This time it's with an I. I might change it to a Y at this point. at AMI Meets World, like that old TV show Girl Meets World, but instead it's I'm Meeting the World. That's where you can find me.
There it is. Well, I appreciate you, Aminata, for doing this. I'm glad we got a chance to tell your story. For those of you who are watching and haven't already, make sure you follow Aminata's journey at PYNK.SN. And also you can follow her at her social pages as well. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel, follow across all platforms, share this with anybody you know who's thinking about making the move back to the continent, who's thinking about starting a business on the continent. These insights are going to be really helpful and useful. And anybody you know who's specifically in Senegal, make sure you share this with them so they can support in person. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you again, Aminata, for doing this. And we will see you guys all on the next live stream. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.